Hello, this is Signals from the Hill, a podcast about comics from Avery Hill Publishing. I'm Ricky Miller, co-publisher at Avery Hill. In this episode, we have a conversation with Pidge, creator of our graphic novel series, Infinite Wheatpaste. Pidge is a Colorado-based cartoonist and educator. She has been writing and drawing and self-publishing her epic sci-fi fantasy series, Infinite Wheatpaste, since 2016. A collected edition of the first 9 issues, Infinite Wheatpaste Catalytic Conversions, was published by us earlier this year, and there are 2 more collections planned. I discussed with Pidge the arts and media that have influenced her and fed into her work. Here it is. Hi, Pidge. How are you?
I'm great. How about you?
Yes, I'm very well, thank you. Where are you at the moment?
I am in a small town in the mountains in Colorado, and I'm in my living room. It's a very tranquil place.
Cool. Tell us a bit about your neighborhood, actually. What is there like lots of houses, or is it a town? Or...
We have, so it's a tiny town called Gunnison, and we have a university, believe it or not, where we have about 1700 students who fluctuate in for the school year and disappear for the summer. So the summers, those students leave and then the tourists come in, which is a lot of Texans and Oklahomans. And the town itself is more of a ranching kind of town, and it's moving more toward, I want to say, the school and the college are probably, and the hospital are the biggest employers. So just a little rural spot with a lot of people who have horses and cows.
I think that's basically how I imagined America in the 80s. Was like Dynasty or Dallas set around that way? I feel like maybe I could be very wrong. I feel like
Well,
maybe Denver.
this spot was actually in competition to become the capital because it was larger than Denver
Oh, really?
at the time, and the governor was here. And so we have weird things where, yes, there are only 5,000 regular residents ish in the town, 15,000 in the county ish, and the county is larger than 2 states in the union. So it's massive, and like a lot of Bureau of Land Management, a lot of park rangers like managing all of that land. But we have odd things like our streets are really, really wide compared to like what you'd think of for a small town. And it was because there's a rule about how many carriages should be able to fit on it for it to be the capital. But it works out well because we have a lot of snow. It's the coldest place in the lower 48 with year-round average temperature. There are places that will get colder, but we're the coldest on average in the 48.
That would absolutely suit me, definitely. We put out a special edition of the podcast earlier in the year where you talked to Shelley Bond about Infinite Wheatpaste. So this time we're going to do something different. Um, we're going to look at how different cultural things have influenced your work. And I asked you for a film, a song, a book, a comic, and a TV show. Although you swapped out the song for a podcast, I think, in the end. And so not necessarily your favorites, but ones where they've kind of welded their way into how you think and what you do. And yeah, just I guess they're related to your work in some kind of way. So the idea is that we talk about them and then look at how they've influenced your work and maybe what they say about your work. How easy did you find it to come up with this list?
Um, Not easy. I think I'm pretty eclectic, so it's hard for me to narrow things down. And I think a lot of that being a really eclectic is I have kind of tastes that are a little old, skew a little older than my age group because I have a much older sibling, and also tend to skew a little bit more dude, which I think kind of comes across in Infinite Wheatpaste. Like they're really strong women in Infinite Wheatpaste, and like a lot of queerness in Infinite Wheatpaste, but there's also like lot of kind of guyish humor, and that's very much my brother's influence.
Yeah, I mean, well, Infinite Wheatpaste, there's kind of a lot of different things going on in there as well anyway, so it's kind of no surprise that you do have multiple kind of interests and avenues and lots of different options we could have gone with here. Um, First of all, though, do you watch TV or listen to music or anything while you're working, or would you purely just kind of keep everything else out?
Um, if I'm by myself, I prefer to listen to podcasts while I'm working. If my spouse and I share a studio, he prefers TV, so we'll put on typically shows we've already seen. We put on a lot of like old Star Trek and um, like things we've already seen before or stuff we can kind of tune out. Like, unfortunately, the ID channel gets in there a lot of the murder shows, but then I don't. He's like, "What's going on with the?" I'm like, "I haven't been watching forever, man. I'm literate. So we don't typically pay attention while
Yeah,
working.
it's just kind of background noise. Um, let's go and first of all, let's pick the film that you wanted to talk about, which is Spirited Away. Yeah, tell us about this film.
So Spirited Away is perhaps best described as an old obsession of mine. Um, I would watch it daily after school throughout a lot of high school. And it would be like the thing I'd come and, put it on and do my homework. And my rule was I'd have to find something I hadn't noticed before in it, just one little detail. And then I felt like I could move on and then work on whatever I was working on. And I think that really runs through a lot of my work. I like having little details that you wouldn't notice the first or even maybe the 30th, 40th time through. But also I just love the nature of things being um, what they appear at first and then a like spiritual layer to them. So the first 4 minutes of that film, um, or 4.5 minutes, some of my favorite papers in college were just analyzing that like tiny bit of that film. And what's interesting to me is it actually goes through like what I call the spiritual architecture of the entire film in the first 4 minutes. So, and it's really just like after the first minute they get out of the car, like those three are crucial. So it shows you like the different architects of the like spiritual things. Like you start to tell that when she's on the train, like the um I forget what they're called, but like they're little houses for spirits. I think it's actually like a sort of decompressed visual representation of that entire spiritual world, not just like the things you'll encounter, but also like the reverse order you're going to encounter them in. And it's like you're seeing a votive or a symbol of those places before she breaks into the spiritual world of it, and then she goes through it again in reverse, which is really cool to me.
Oh, well, I did not know that because I've only seen it once, and that was that was about 10 years ago, I think. I kind of realized I'd kind of missed the whole of Miyazaki and just never. I think I was just a bit too old, and when it came around to the UK, so I kind of borrowed a lot of DVDs of them off of one of my friends who's very into it, and then yeah, kind of sat and watched them all, and yeah, that was definitely a big favorite. It's just a lovely film, and like your work, yeah, very stacked, very kind of full of layers and yeah, background things going on in the background and little Easter eggs and things, and yeah, do you have any other favorites of his as well? Is it him in general or that particular film that you like?
I really love everything he's done, but that one really strikes me when I put the list together, it is the most important film to me, period. But it I tried to put the list together based on what would kind of relate to the themes in my own work, and that kind of folklore like story running through, but is very what I'm into. I'm into that twisting folklore and making your own kind of folklore style stories. And he does have a very traditional core to it about like hard work and um honesty, and like how she and like being cunning and all of these sort of value things that are built into stories that we would relate to children. And so that I think kind of comes into my work. Like I think there is a center or a core to each story. There's I'm not out to teach lessons, but I think if you Vonnegut says, like, if you want to put your paraphrasing, you want to put your character through hell to show that they're gold. It's not something you want to tell, you want to show. And the only way you can show it is by throwing everything at them. So, she has everything thrown at her and she comes out as gold. And so I enjoy that, but I also like the everything existing. In my mind, it exists simultaneously. And I like to think of a thing I call in my own head like absolute suspension of disbelief, which is, yes, live in your real world, live in what's happening around you and be present in that, but also allow your mind to let everything exist at once. Like, so, you notice a door that you didn't see on the street that you've been on a lot. Your first thought is, well, that's a magic, your first thought might be like, oh, maybe that's a magic door. Well, yeah, it was there the whole time, but like let yourself feel that or believe that and let that exist simultaneously to the real world. So I think I have a lot of fanciful things, and instead of dismissing them, I think of it more as like a simultaneous, like, or, an absolute suspension of disbelief. I can let everything exist at once, which I think is very Wheatpaste.
And as well as I guess the writing and the story, do you find the animation and I guess the illustration aspects and the composition and the shots, have they made their way into your work at all?
Well, definitely. And, I always wanted to be a cartoonist. And then I just didn't think that anybody was making when I was in my early teens comics I was interested in reading. And I really just hadn't found them yet. Like the mainstream of comics was just not it for me. And so I kind of looked into other things, and for a long time I thought I was going to do animation or perhaps stop motion, and really am into that. I like, kind of practical problem solving. So uh it's kind of like that film is like the beginning of my path not taken. And I would I think the only thing really keeping me from that, I can work in an ensemble. Like I've done a lot of theater stuff, but that's somebody else's content. If it's mine, it's too personal and it's not a team sport to me, which is what led me back into comics. It's something I want to do and have control over every aspect of it. So um, I think it has found its way into the work. I think he has themes of industrialization and like, workers and their labor. And, he had periods of being very Marxist, which is something he moved away from later. But so I would say that those are maybe not as optimistic, but I think his dealing with the realities of what we do to our planet, industrialization, how does that affect humans, and his like beautiful sense of optimism. I like that duality, and I find that's something I like to um, seek out. Life isn't interesting without a little conflict, maybe.
Um, as we've been talking a little bit about the comics, let's go to the comic, which the one you've chosen, which is a classic, Love and Rockets. Um,
Yeah.
Possibly the greatest comic ever, could be. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, I have not gotten as deep into Jaime's stuff as I have Gilbert.
oh, that I'm
Just
kind of the opposite.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I like Jaime's. I mean, I like them
Well,
both. Like I read it all, but yeah, that's the stuff I kind of am more into. Maybe it's the music aspects as well, but yeah.
no, I love Jaime's stuff, but I kind of read it asynchronistically. There we go. And I haven't read through the whole thing just because I've been like savoring it so much. And it was starting with Palomar, uh, just all but curled up in a ball, like crying my eyes out, having read it all far too fast. That made me really slow down and like want to just go through and nibble at Jaime's stuff because reading too much of that at once is, I think, just more than anybody can handle. It's too good.
Yeah, I haven't binged it. I've got the two kind of Lucas, massive, the big thick ones, but I tend to just read the little, like the ones I think comes out about once a year or maybe every 2 years at the moment. They're collecting up his newer strips, which are just fantastic still. I mean, I mean, it's the art as well. Like his art style is definitely one of my favorites all time. But did Gilbert or Jaime, is the art something you've studied? Is it something you learn from and bring into your work?
Yeah, I do like to do an occasional like kind of redraw, like a remix of like Jaime panels, especially. The problem with like reading too much Jaime for me is the art is so beautiful, it makes me feel like physically ill. So
Yeah.
I have to like calm down. And Gilbert, I love him, but he doesn't do that to me. He's not as let's say refined as Jaime, and like how economical Jaime is, it makes me like envious and angry, but it's too beautiful for me to handle. It's actually because I like him better in a lot of ways. Like
Mm.
I can't handle him, but I will do like redraws of his or like redos of his compositions with my stuff in there just to like kind of break up what I'm doing and try to do something else.
Did you have any other particular comic artists that you found influenced your style as you were developing?
Style. I always, I kind of bring him up, but like Stokoe was the first American cartoonist I found. I liked Sandman, but James Stokoe was the first American cartoonist who is actually visually doing anything that was interesting to me. But I went all the way back to when I was a teenager, and he's not much older than I am. And I went all the way back to his like early deviant art days is when I found him. He wasn't even getting published yet. And I don't know how that happenstance occurred, but I was obsessed with like even spot illustrations, like everything he was doing, all of those textures. And his stuff was so good, I thought it would never get published in America. And then he started getting traction and getting into places like Image. And he's the only reason I think I took a double take at American Comics because I went, okay, there are other people interested in the kind of things I'm interested in. And then I started to find more and more, and it was there. I just didn't see it. So,
Yeah. I guess the other thing with Love and Rockets as well to mention is just the fact that it's their body of work, and they've been making it for, I don't know, what's it, 30, 40 years or something.
Like
It's
me too.
yeah. Do you, is that something you admire as well? Obviously, with Wheatpaste, you've been working on that a very long time, kind of, and do you see yourself doing Wheatpaste in 30 or 40 years, new stories? And because it's such a big universe, like you can do anything with that universe and those characters in the same way they do, I guess.
I'm not going to make that direct comparison. They're too cool. But I'm closing out issue 18 right now. I'm on 23 of 24 pages. I feel so close. And it just feels like I stretched my legs. Like it was a lot of work, but I I am having trouble narrowing down what I want in volume 3 of what I've got planned. Um because I have so many other things behind it that I want to do. So I think I'm 8 or so years in, and I really don't see myself stopping. There might be detours like Jaime, for instance, did some kids comics and things like that. And there are definitely some like kind of projects I have on the shelf that I'd like to do at some point, but I'm really content to just keep going with what I'm doing.
Yeah, I mean, that was part of the reason that attracted me to Wheatpaste in the first place. Was I grew up reading like Cerebus and Strangers in Paradise and Bone and Love and Rockets and all those kind of just long form creator owned stories where they just went anywhere that the creator wanted them to go, grew with the creators. That is just such a like a like it's rare nowadays like that you get creators stick. I mean, there's kind of obvious exceptions over a lot of the image guys, kind of people like Eric Larson doing Savage Dragon and Todd McFarlane kind of doing Spawn. I guess there's there's people like that still doing it, but it's not quite, the indie scene's not like that anymore, just because I guess making floppy comics is just very hard nowadays compared to, even it's probably harder than back then, to reach an audience with floppy comics. Because I mean, Sim was selling tens of thousands of copies of his books, and arriving at shows in limousines. It's like, can you imagine now? And he
Yeah.
used to pay for like Colleen Duran and people like that to go to shows because he was making so much money. But that kind of doesn't exist in the same way anymore, with creators kind of having their own personal project that they self-publish, or maybe publish through a small publisher and just keep going with a long time, especially in the floppy world.
Yeah, I think if it's one person all the way through, you there are more opportunities to reward an audience for sticking with you. Like, Gru's another great example of a long-running
Absolutely,
comic.
yeah.
And like the long-running jokes, like you just feel a part of the jokes.
Yeah, I mean, every issue is the same, but they're all as good as each other. They're all like excellent. It's yeah, it's yeah, great. Yeah, I used to read Grew a lot as well. I guess maybe it exists in web comics now. It's probably where it is now rather than in printing. Anyway, let's move on before I go down a rabbit hole with this.
No, but
Um,
yeah, the big attraction, just one last thought on
yeah,
it is, especially with Love and Rockets, you can do stuff that you can't do with any other medium. If you're gonna do even a long series show, you're gonna have different actors playing the same person. But we had years of Perla before we ever found out that was, Maggie. Not to spoil for anyone, but um, and it's not two different actors playing the same person. It is the person. Like that is the only form they ever existed in. And you can reach so far into a person's life. And like the best example might be like Maggie's slap. Like you see every person who slapped her over 20 years of, and like those moments as it cycles through, and like the power of being able to do that with a direct creator owned one person working on it the whole time. It is so direct to the audience, such fidelity. I can't get over the possibilities. So
Absolutely. Well, let's go for a TV show which kind of did that for a while anyway. Well, probably for as long as you can do that kind of thing on TV. Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
yes. I like Buffy, just I'm like right in the era. Is the only autograph I've ever sent off for was Sarah Michelle Gellar's when I was 8, and I was like so excited.
Did you get it?
Um, oh yeah, yeah,
Oh,
I
cool.
have it still
What did you get?
somewhere.
What did you get signed?
Uh, I
Just a
I
piece of
like had
paper.
to send
Oh,
off. Yeah, like we some other kids on the playground, and we got together with like some celebrity magazine, and we're like, oh my god, we could send off for Sarah Michelle Gellar. So like we got our we got our money together. We had to get like an envelope and an envelope, or and I got back her autograph with her and a tombstone, and it was like whatever the one was at that time. But it I don't really feel very direct connections with actors, but it was just really exciting to me at that age to feel like I was connected to something primary to that show, because I think everybody I knew wanted to be Buffy. At least anybody, I went to a Christian school, so it was like hush hush. Only a few of us would be like that Buffy. She's pretty awesome, because you couldn't even talk about the show because there were demons in it. Oh, terrible. So it was like my favorite, like almost naughty secret. Only a couple of us even knew about her. So,
yeah.
but like the stories being, those early ones are very like teen gore. Like the you know the monster of the week is very representative of
Yeah, that
something.
whole first season, basically, isn't it? Yeah.
And it I like the idea of I like encapsulating an idea into a monster, because what is a monster but an idea? And so that really weaves well, I think, through my tastes even into adulthood. But I tend to rewatch the show. I like to get to, I can't say I'll say Thanksgiving, but not the one where she's making Thanksgiving in college the next year. So there's no spoilers, but I like to get to what happens to Joyce by Thanksgiving. It's like my deadline on my
Right.
rewatch
Yeah.
of the year.
Yeah, I've watched the whole thing once, and then I did start rewatching it, and I got to, I think, near the end of season 4, but it was in, I just had a child, so I was kind of at the point where I was sitting up quite a lot late at night by myself with looking after him and stuff. So yeah, that was the only time I could get that far. I've got new ones on the way, so maybe I'll finish off the rest of it. Although I feel like I think I've seen all the best episodes again anyway. So season 2 and 3 are kind of where it's at for me, mostly the Faith arc, I guess. And yeah, I kind of love that. So, and again, it's that long form storytelling, and it's kind of, obviously Joss Whedon is a big comics fan, and a lot of what he was doing was from comics and hadn't been done in that kind of way. Those kind of long arcs in the kind of fantasy world, with kind of great, satisfying little stories, but then with a big payoffs at the end and ongoing relationships in the same kind of superhero soap opera kind of way. So it does, yeah, it integrate. I think there's a lot of crossover in comics and Buffy fandom.
Well, and I have the first set, like the extended universe. I have every single one in the volumes, which I paid way too much for some of them to track them down. But and I feel like that's the end of Buffy. I like some of the new stuff they have on the shelf, and I still will like pick one up as like a fun read, but it's not Buffy. It's like other Buffy. It's like it's not 616 universe for me. But I do love the world of Shrimp making its way into the comics. Like that's a good old.
Did you read the
Sorry,
Casey
World
Noah
Without Shrimp.
Did you read the Casey Nowak Young Buffy books?
Are those the new ones that they're doing once the property kind of shuffled away from Dark Horse?
No, they were from a few years ago actually. But they're excellent. I mean, they're pitched very young. They're kind of like pitched at like yeah, kind of middle grade YA. But because it's Casey Nowak, it's just brilliant. So yeah, I would definitely recommend those from a
Thank
comics
you.
point of view. Um, let's look at the podcast now. Let's go somewhere different. So yeah, I mean, first of all, you did give me one potential song, and then but yeah, you said you're not a music person really. And the last person I interviewed that did the same thing actually, which was Kat, but, which is for a future episode. For but yeah. So what was the tell me about the podcast?
Yeah, my perhaps the kids like to call their toxic trait. My toxic trait is I don't really notice music. I'll often forget that hearing is one of the senses. Um, it's like I know that there's probably a piece of my soul missing, but it's okay. It's filled with like a warehouse of useless information I pick up from podcasts. And one of my favorites is Stuff to Blow Your Mind. It kind of sneaked into my favorites because it's one that's associated with NPR and iHeartRadio, and it's one I can actually recommend to my students. So if they're interested in a topic, um, yeah, I had a student who wants to be a mycologist. I'm like, wait until you hear about mushrooms like talking to each other, and like, let me give you this podcast. So it's one of my favorites because I do know I can share with anyone what's in there because they keep it pretty that they don't swear or anything, and that is actually nice in my world as an educator to have some things I can share with them and not worry about that filter. But they go off into my main personal interests are like science and history, folklore, and like how we incorporate parts of the world we can't understand into story. And so they'll go through the science of the topic and then how humans really rationalized whatever it is, or different forms of understanding, like you know listening to one and they're talking about like elves. Germ theory was like the death of elves, and as soon as we could start narrowing down infection to elves, we started to we stopped almost completely talking about elves in like literature and things, and then like dark elves started coming around, and like um but they were usually used to explain illness, and so weird things like that, like how and how does scientific advancement kind of kill story in some ways. They don't really have a bend on it, but I find that interesting. And I'll get a topic and I'll just make a couple of notes about it, but they'll end up in wheat paste. I'll kind of think about like, oh, mushrooms talking to each other, like, well, what if there's a whole world and all these electrical impulses between like these mitochondrial like networks are actually like how information is transferred? Like playing with ideas like that. I like that kind of like absolute suspension of disbelief, just like letting an idea continue to trail on its own. So
Yeah, I gave it a go. I listened to the ninja one because I thought I'd just pluck one out that I thought looked interesting, and yeah, I mean it was great. I think I'll definitely be dipping in. There's a bit they've kind of got a whole thread on like B movies and that kind of thing as well, haven't they? Is that something you're into? Like the B movie side of things? And
yeah, I'm more choosy on which ones of their like cinema ones that I'll like listen to. And I'll typically enjoy like their Bay's vampire one was like a really good one, but I don't think I'm gonna seek it out. There are a few like they got me into, oh gosh, this is gonna be terrible because I know he's a favorite. Santos. They got me into Santos movies, like his Santos time travels and he's a professor in his like wrestling mask, and like So those really cheesy, fun ones that they'll go through stuff that maybe didn't make it onto Mystery Science Theater, and I'll do like a Misty, but um, I just didn't have like that connection to the B movies in the video store, and I don't know if they really circulate around as much. You really have to go find them.
One of the things I love about the podcast as well, which I think is a thread going through quite a lot of this stuff, which is that it is so eclectic, but also it's just so kind of all part of the same thing. It all fits. It's kind of lots of different ideas. They've obviously got the very clever people who do a lot of research, which I imagine you read a lot and do a lot of research into what you're doing as well. And just like the love, and I mean they've done hundreds of those podcasts, haven't they, as well? It's again, it kind of does fit in with, as I look back through the list, there is just that whole thread of people devoting themselves very much to, this is their kind of what they do, this is their oeuvre. The like Miyazaki, there's the yeah, obviously the Hernandez brothers, and then Joss Whedon's Buffy, which was again like his a big labor of love.
Mhm. Yeah.
And finally we're going to talk about the book. So you've gone more with a genre, really. So yeah, Victorian horror and sci-fi and their intersection. Have you got a few examples for people?
I went back and I had kind of read a lot of like 60s, 70s, and 80s, like what would be considered kind of classic modern sci-fi. And I decided about 2 summers ago to go back and do um, early sci-fi. And then I was really struck by those social circles and how many of those people really knew like the people who were writing horror, and how some of them had also written horror, and there really wasn't much of a distinction at the time and some of that early stuff. And so I started getting into um, Victorian horror and Victorian sci-fi. Um, I was on a huge like Jules Verne kick, and obviously went back and like did some, did the original Dracula, went on a whole like thing with stuff to blow your mind about like the origins of the vampire. They have a great episode about how influential the Irish ideas of vampire are actually on the original Dracula. It's a great listen. Um, but just seeing how uh, the supernatural and the scientific didn't, they had a very like messy split that was very like muddled. They're very intermingled, and I found that really interesting. And again, I think it goes back to I'm always interested in how people need to rationalize parts of the world we don't understand and how we go about doing that. So maybe that's like a running theme through all of these selects. I'm so much more interested in people than I am in nature and like in other things. And I'm interested less in like the science and the nature as I am in how people got around to discovering things. Like the Victorian era is a big time when we started like really codifying and classifying the natural world. And when we didn't have things that easily fit into categories, it's almost like now we start moving into sci-fi, or uh just the human mind is an endlessly fascinating place, I guess.
Yeah, no, I'm kind of interested in what you're saying about the crossover between the horror and the sci-fi. I guess a lot of that was probably just due to the fact it was like the beginnings of science were happening then, and most of that must have seemed pretty scary and kind of almost magical in some ways. And yeah, I mean that's obviously very evident in things like Frankenstein, where it literally becomes a horror, but starts as sci-fi, I guess. And yeah, you weave some horror and sci-fi elements into your work as well? Are they kind of the genres you're most interested in
I think
terms
so.
of, yeah, that kind of, yeah.
Um, but yeah, like that overlap is really fascinating when you get to kind of people further down the line. Like Jules Verne is very, very separate. Like he really separates like the science and did a lot of research and would get into the minutia of the science of the time. And I feel like he's a big branch of like that breakaway, whereas somebody like H.G. Wells kind of stuck in with the horror too. So I think it's interesting how we can tip it one way or another. But it's it definitely winds its way into what I do, but I think that's how anybody is. Like you pick the things you're interested in and you incorporate them into your worldview or the kind of work that you do. And I think I just like to put a lot of humor in those things and maybe not take everything really seriously. But I think I like to look at really serious people.
Sure. Um, so I'm wondering what, looking at them as a group, you think they have in common. And do you think there's kind of like a thread going through these?
Yeah, I think it's all about like the humanness of story and like how we're influenced by external things like we can't help but um tell ourselves stories about things we don't understand. And maybe the thing I don't understand, I feel like I study human nature, but I don't really understand human action as much as I would like. And so when I'm doing stories, I'm kind of working out understanding myself and other people better. And it's working out uh yeah, like telling myself a story about life, right? And telling you a story about life. And I think you come to a better understanding. Fiction is probably truer than nonfiction in so many ways. Like nonfiction, there's a political stance, there's like economic place in nonfiction. Who are the winners and who are the losers? And fiction, you're telling things that aren't true, but I think you can't hide behind them. So I think you struck on with that Victorian like horror and sci-fi overlap. Like there's a lot of fear there. That's what they couldn't hide behind their fiction, right? Like we're able to reach out to life on other planets, and H.G. Wells does War of the Worlds, right? Uh, there's that fear that is in some of that. I like really optimistic sci-fi. I'm a big Trek person, um, bit of a Trekkie, and uh, but you can't hide the heart or the meaning or the message of whatever it is. And I think uh, all of the things that I picked really resonate with me for that reason. There's nowhere to hide in that fiction.
And with that, Pidge, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.